Welcome back. Thanks for joining me today. Good to see everybody. So today we are analyzing the speaking style of Ginni Rometty, who is the former CEO of IBM. And I'm not sure if it's pronounced Rometty or Rometty, but I wanted to do this analysis today because I came across Ginni Rometty a couple years ago, just browsing around, and I found that she was a really interesting and compelling and charismatic speaker, and you'll see in the video that we're about to watch. And again, the value of these speaker analyses is that we want to be able to look at successful, effective public speakers from different industries and different backgrounds and learn tips and tricks from their strategies and what's effective for them so that we can incorporate it into our own presentations. So I want you to look at a few key things. Nina just joined. Hey, Nina, how you doing? Good to see you. There's going to be three major things that I want to draw your attention to as we do the analysis here. Number one is Ginni's ability to pause and build anticipation as she's revealing information. Number two is her use of data and statistics. That's a huge one in this case because as the CEO of IBM, there's a tremendous amount of data and numbers that she's bringing to bear, especially given the importance of artificial intelligence in her presentation. And then the third is confidence and enthusiasm and just her overall personality and how that's coming across. So with that being said, let's take a look at her presentation here. And this is a presentation that she gave a couple years ago at the Economic Club of Chicago. So basically a group of powerful business people and leading investors from different industries.
Well, I should first, though, just tell you, when I landed this afternoon, there is something about when you land and it's home. And I don't know how many of you, if you've been away from home for long, I have so many things to be grateful for from this city, not just my family, but my friends. I was saying to Ed knew me and mentored me when I was a young pup here, to Northwestern, to so many clients that are here. So it is a great feeling. So I hope you'd heard of Watson before you watched that little clip. Did any? My team was going to make sure you'd heard of Watson by then. So look, I will talk a little bit about that later tonight. This is something that is so meaningful, I think, to the world, and we'll speak a bit. But I hope you take away tonight from my little time up front here something that is really not about technology, maybe just at the root. You know, at a group like this, an economic club, I think everybody thinks about competitive advantage and what's the basis of competitive advantage. You think about it if you have a company, your products, your services. I think you think about it a lot if you're a country. We talk a lot about that now these days. If for yourself, for whether it is a city, even like Chicago. And usually the basis of competitive advantage doesn't change that often. But I wanted to start our time by suggesting that it actually is changing right now. And I would summarize it in a single word, simple word, data. Now you might think, oh, that does sound like technology. But I don't mean if sort of you vision a tsunami of data or a big haystack. That isn't really what I'm talking about. The metaphor I would use, because it's not about volume, I think we're entering an era with this basis is more of a metaphor of oil and a natural resource. And if you think about oil as a natural resource, think about who the value goes to. And it has to be refined, extracted, processed, and out of that comes, whether it's electricity, petroleum, food, all sorts of different things come out of that. But it has to go through that process. So to kick us off, I was going to just tee up 5 quick questions and answer them myself. But as I said, in the end, it's not about technology.
Okay, let's pause there. So those quick questions, by the way, those are going to be rhetorical questions. And rhetorical questions we've talked about in the past, but rhetorical questions are very effective and very powerful ways of introducing ideas and kind of creating the experience of an interaction with an audience, even if you can't directly interact with them. So first of all, notice the opening. How she began the presentation, talking about home, talking about the city of Chicago and the kind of warm energy and showing the personality there. And you can see she has this confidence and this sense of ease about herself, this comfort in her own skin, speaking in front of this large audience. That ability to project warmth and personality is so powerful. and it really brings the audience in. She knows her stuff, she knows her content and her material, but there's the extra element of the personality that really takes things to another level. That personal touch, talking about her own personal background and experience with the city and some of the audience members there. Competitive advantage, that's the key framing, right? So we know that she's speaking to a business audience or a audience of business leaders. Obviously, competitive advantage is a theme that is going to resonate deeply with them. And so that's a strong way for her to start out the presentation. We talk a lot about understanding your audience. That's an example of understanding your audience, right? Actually putting it into practice. You have to know who you're speaking to in order to know how to impact them and how to create a memorable experience for them. So she's creating a strong frame right from the beginning. And that gets the audience's attention. And also, you will notice the unique take that competitive advantage is changing. So she's going a little bit against the grain here in terms of creating a little bit of a different take or a different perspective on the concept of competitive advantage. And she boils it down into one concept: data. Right. And so now we're interested here. She's built up that anticipation, right? She's paused at a few key moments here and built up that anticipation. So now we want to learn more. What is the new competitive advantage? What is the implications of this data, right? So we're hearing from this expert, and she's going to be sharing some more data and statistics shortly. And then again, just to reinforce the kind of personality aspect, notice the enthusiasm, that winning smile, the charisma that she has, the positivity. You will notice that she has a lot of expressiveness in her facial expressions, and smiling is one aspect of that, but it's not the only version of that. But also the hand gestures, the way she moves physically as she's speaking. She really embodies the information and the passion, and obviously she has that total confidence. And then, of course, the metaphor of oil, right? So this concept was around, I'm not sure how long by this point, this was in 2017, how long to this point people were talking about data as the new oil, but that's a very strong metaphor, obviously. And so she's utilizing that metaphor as a way to reinforce the concept of what she's trying to get across, the importance of data here. So let's continue.
But I am going to start with that thought. So if data is actually this new form of your competitive advantage, the basis, so what's actually in all that data that I'm talking about? So if you were a doctor, you saw a little bit of this on the video here. Perhaps you've lost track, but already there are 80 million MRIs that have been taken. I was telling someone over cocktails, probably half of those are from my husband's, all his surgeries, but there are 80 million now. There have been 500,000 genes sequenced. And there are, if you look at cancer articles written, there are 100,000 articles written in a year. So what could a doctor know? Those of you that are in consumer or retail businesses, there are only 3.5 million searches done per minute. 90% of you out there allow people to know everything about you by turning on geo-tracking on your phone. I am in the 10% because I know what they do with that data. And the uploading, 500 hours of video per minute are uploaded, and what's in it? Or those of you that run a company, your security manager, well, there's only 10,000 research papers to read every day, 600,000 forms of malware, that 400,000 have had a change made, a variant every single day. So I bring that all up because this is a world of all of this data, but what's in it? Which takes me to my second question, which, okay, not only what's in it, but where is this data?
Okay, so again, the use of rhetorical questions, right, to bring up that anticipation and to keep us engaged. When you ask a rhetorical question of your audience, it's a question that you will eventually answer. You're not legitimately asking for their input. But when you do that, it keeps them engaged, right? And it keeps them thinking along with you. So you're kind of guiding them towards this framing, this narrative that you've created and that you're constructing. And so you're essentially, in many ways, holding their hand as you go through the material and kind of guiding them through this thought process. So that's one major reason why rhetorical questions are so powerful and effective. So here's where we see a lot of data. I mean, she's talking about the theme of data, but she's actually using specific numbers and statistics in her presentation. 500,000 genes sequenced, 80 million MRIs. And then she also refers to those of you in the consumer or retail space, right? So specifically calling out one segment of this audience, right? So rather than just talking in the abstract, because a lot of her information, a good chunk of her presentation here is healthcare related, but she also wanted to give some attention and some acknowledgement to the consumer and retail people in the room as well. When you mention that specific group, anybody who is in the consumer or retail space is going to immediately perk up a little bit, because they might be thinking, oh, 80 million MRIs, that's not that relevant for me. But when she specifically calls out my industry, now I'm paying just a little bit more attention. Very effective and very simple technique as well. That goes again to the knowledge of the audience. So she knows who she's speaking to in this case. And the question for you is, as a presenter, do you know who you're speaking to? Right? I mean, there's a lot of strangers in this audience for her. We can imagine there's probably several hundred people in the audience that evening. If you're giving a presentation to 5 or 10 or 20 people, it behooves you to really get a sense of each individual person. What are their biases? What are their assumptions? What is their perspective and their point of view entering the room? And then that will enable you to speak more effectively and to be more persuasive for those specific individuals in that audience. And notice the humor as well. She had two noticeable humorous moments there. One was 80 million MRIs. Half of them are probably from my husband because of all the surgery and the tests that he's done. And that got people laughing. And another one was talking about the consumer data and tracking consumer data. And she said, I'm in the 10% that does not allow the tracking because I know what they do with that data. That is stuff, it may be off the cuff. It may not be. Probably it's not off the cuff. Probably it was planned. The thing with humor is that you don't have to be like the funniest person in the world. You don't have to be a stand-up comedian. You can plan humor out. You can plan out jokes in advance. Just go through your material and your content and try to identify opportunities where, okay, this is an opportunity where I can use a joke, or I can mention a humorous statement that I heard from somebody else. You can even give credit to other comedians or famous funny people, for example. But it's a great way to kind of balance the heavy, dense information of these data and the statistics with some more personality and more lightheartedness.
And I think something that's very much overlooked, it's not the data that you search out on the internet. 20% of all of the world's data is searchable. 80% is in your company. It's in your possession, and that's where all the value lies. Everyone thinks it's the other way around. Not true. So, what do you need if you wanted to make sense of all of this data? So if you allow me, that's really what was behind what you watched there. Until today, every past era of computing was never able to do anything with that data. It's a new era. Watson is just an example of that era. It's what we call cognitive, but these are systems that you don't program. They understand, they reason, and they learn over data. And that means that they can even develop senses like you and I have. So if I just use ours as an example, our Watson, the ability to see. If you had a melanoma, we're now 95% accurate looking at a lesion that's actually a melanoma. The ability to hear. You probably will believe this, but when people have a conversation, you'll miss 5% of the words. Hopefully you're not going to miss like 25% tonight, okay? But 5% on average. We're already up to 5.5% with Watson. Ability to read. All right, 12 languages. That's 90% of the internet population in the world. And then the ability to feel, sensor, motion, and the like. But what would be made possible then with all of that? Why do I even tee this all up? Well, what's actually made possible is to transform every industry, every company, and I think every profession.
Okay, let me just pause there. So that right there is an illustration of the rule of three. every industry, every company, and every profession. So she's listing those three things. Now, probably these technological advances will transform a lot more than that, but at least for this audience, business focused, that's a great framing. That's a great concise packaging of the issue. The rule of three in general in rhetoric is an insight based on psychology that ideas that are presented in groups of three or categories in groups of three are more memorable and more impactful in human psychology than other sizes, groups of four, groups of five, or what have you. So it does benefit you if you can somehow boil down your major ideas into groups of three major categories, three major items. It'll be more memorable and easier for your audience to process the information. I want to also just go back to something at the beginning of this section here, because I just want to draw attention to the pausing, how she did the pausing here. Watch this.
And I think but what's in it, which takes me to my second question, which, okay, not only what's in it, but where is this data? And I think something that's very much overlooked, it's not the data that you search out on the internet. 20% of all of the world's data is searchable.
Okay, so you see the pausing there, right? This is a subtle thing, but it actually makes a big difference, because when you pose a significant or profound question, you want to let that question sink in, right? You don't just want to say, where is the data? Well, the data is here, blah, blah, blah. You want to say, where is all of this data? Pause. Look at the audience. Let it sink in. Let the audience to start to think and process that question, maybe start to come up with their own answers, right? Again, creating that experience of a almost conversational dynamic between you as the presenter and your audience. And so a lot of times, more novice presenters are deathly afraid of silence and deathly afraid of pausing. But what I always tell people is silence is part of communication. It's not the opposite of communication or the lack of communication. It's actually part of communication. Silence and the use of silence is a tool that you can use strategically to impact your audience and to create a more interesting and engaging experience. It's all in how you use it. And so Ginni Rometty here is doing that very skillfully. Also in this section, she's talked about 20% of all data is searchable versus 80% that is not, and the 80% is in your company. That's a great binary framing of the issue. Now, notice, she could have spliced that data into much smaller categories, right? Out of the 20%, maybe 10% is on public search engines, and then 5% is in private databases, blah, 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 but it's still searchable. She's just boiled it down into very simple, high-level concepts. It's easy for the audience to digest and get it right away, right? Because she's communicating an overall narrative about the power of data and how this is transforming industry. She also, in this section, mentions Watson, which is IBM's kind of flagship product at this time, the artificial intelligence product. So she's a saleswoman. As the CEO of IBM, you are the chief salesperson. And so her ability to interweave that kind of sales pitch and talking up her product and her company's product and their solution is very significant, because she's doing it in a subtle way, not in a over the top kind of hitting you over the head kind of way, right? She's doing it in a way that is very smooth and integrates into this overall kind of informational, educational experience that she's creating for the audience. And then again, the data point, 95% accuracy. That's a strong data point. When you're trying to incorporate numbers and statistics into your presentation, focus on the most powerful and most impactful data points. So probably there's been some applications where Watson was only 8% accurate or 32% accurate or something. So she's not going to waste her time mentioning those, right? Those are still in development, still working on those. She's going to draw their attention to the application where it's 95% accurate. So let's continue. Go back to about starting here.
every industry, every company, and I think every profession. So it was an interesting experience I had, this most recent annual report I did. I don't know about those of you that have to do annual reports, what you experience with this, but I was with Easter with my mother, and I was leaving for the airport, and she said, "Wait a second, I have a report for you." I said, "What?" She said, "Well, I read your annual report, and I've written you a report about your annual report." I said, "Okay, great." She goes, "I understood this one." She goes, "Not the numbers, but I understood all the rest finally." And so what this annual report was, when I say professions, we chose to just do 50 professions that have really been changed by this kind of an era. And that, to me, was an inflection point. That this great competitive advantage would be about making better decisions in all of our, whether it's a company or a profession. Because that in itself is a $2 trillion industry, actually. And whether you choose to believe this or not, what I'm about to tell you is true. Those of us that make decisions every day, a third are great, a third are okay, and a third are not so good. And it's been proven over and over. So we all can benefit, but it's really for much more important reasons. And that's what I said. I hope what you take away is not about technology. What I believe we'll be able to do with this era, with data as a competitive advantage, these new systems, is we will really finally be able to solve what are some of the world's unsolvable problems.
Okay, so we're going to continue in a second, but the story with her mother, funny, again, a humorous moment. This is something that the most skilled speakers do consistently. We saw this with Simon Sinek. We're seeing it with Ginni Rometty, alternating between serious moments, informational, educational, dense information, and then some humor, some levity, right? And creating that mixture is so powerful. And so if you're not doing that already, it's a great skill to start to work on or start to practice in your presentations, little by little, and in your speeches. You know, you're not going to become the world's best public speaker overnight. It takes time. But if you start integrating just a little bit of humor or a little bit of levity or personality, even if you don't have the audience on the floor laughing, completely, but at least a little bit of lightheartedness makes a big difference, right? Creates an interesting kind of experience for the audience. And did she have to tell that funny story about her mother? No, she didn't have to do that. She could have made the same point, no problem, and she wouldn't have lost any information. But it's about creating that experience for the audience, and ironically, humor does actually help the audience to retain the information better. She's consistently connecting the high-level trends and needs in business and in industry with the specific capabilities of Watson, of the solution, right? So connecting high level with low level. We've talked about that in the past. And then again, she's repeating this theme that this is not about technology, right? That's very important. First of all, the phenomenon of repetition, right? She mentioned that near the beginning of her presentation. She's repeating it again here. So she's reinforcing that concept. She didn't just mention it once and be done with it. She reinforces it. Because audiences forget stuff, and she's covering a lot of information here. So she wants to make sure that the audience takes away the most important points. And then also she's going to connect it now with more of the human aspect as well.
And I can already see it. We most recently finished some work with the University of North Carolina with their whole cancer center. And they took a study of 1,000 of the toughest oncology cases. And we applied Watson to it. Watson found 99.9% of exactly what the doctors found. But he also found 30% more. If we take a look at the work we've done with Medtronic, the ability to predict hypoglycemia 3 to 4 hours in advance. Those of you that know people with diabetes or who've had those attacks, if you can actually know in advance, you can do something about it. And this week is actually a week that looks at ways to help with Lou Gehrig's. And working with the Barrow Institute in Arizona, about 2 months ago, found 5 genes that have never been associated before with Lou Gehrig's disease, with ALS. So this is the world that's in front of us. Now, I want to end with my 5th question is, so if you believe in this wonderful world that's in front of us, what would you need to unleash it?
Okay. So we're just about at the end here of the analysis. We could continue watching this. We're only about 9 minutes in to her speech, and there's going to be, I'll post the link to the full video. But she continues on from here. There's many other great techniques and tactics that she uses in her solo speech, but then also during the Q&A when she sits down for the fireside chat with the event host. But how many examples from the medical world did she just provide where Watson is making a difference? How many? Did you count them? Because it was actually 3. Again, the rule of 3, right? She gave the example of oncology and the university that they worked with, Medtronic, and then with diabetes, and then Lou Gehrig's disease, right? So 3 specific examples illustrating and reinforcing what is the difference that their technology is making. And again, in many ways it's a sales pitch, but it doesn't feel like a sales pitch, right? And that's what makes it such an effective sales pitch, because it's inspiring, it's motivating. She's not getting into all the details and all of the features and all the specific technicalities of how this technology works. She's talking about the human impact, the payoff, right? What is the actual payoff that's happening and the actual benefit to people of this advanced technology? That's what matters. And of course, she boils it down into specific high-level numbers. 99% of the melanoma was caught, but then Watson also found 30% more, something like that. So she includes some key data points, doesn't overwhelm the audience with data and numbers, but a few key ones, and frames it in a very easily digestible way so they can take away the fact that it is this technology is making a positive difference for human beings. And when she specifically calls out into the audience, those of you who have diabetes or know someone with diabetes or have had those kinds of attacks, immediately anybody that falls in that category is going to resonate with that, right? So they feel, again, that deeper human and emotional connection above and beyond just the interesting informational aspect. So this, again, is what so many great speakers and presenters do, is they mix and match, combine multiple factors into a single presentation. It's not all data, it's not all information, it's not all emotion or hype or motivation. It's a combination of all of these things. And again, in terms of her nonverbals, you will notice, again, her confidence, her ease, her sense of, that positive demeanor, the smiling, the taking her time, not rushing herself, right? Being able to articulate her points and do it in a strategic and careful and well thought out way, utilizing the pauses and effective anticipation, building the anticipation. So those are some fascinating and interesting takeaways from Ginni Rometty, former CEO of IBM. But other than that, we're going to leave it there for today. I want to thank you again for joining, and hope you found it useful and beneficial. And we'll see you next time. Take care.